Okay, we got
I'm emceeing, so I'll just say Aron and Alan are going to grace us with wonderful Torah tonight. B'chavod.
Great, we've got a minute, so let's jump in. Bissel Torah. Aron, you want to kick us off?
Rav Linus, you're on mute.
As I should be. I said Beetle Torah. I didn't say Bissel Torah. Jacob. Okay. And can we hear Aron?
We cannot hear Aron. I'm sure you're wondering why we've gathered you here today for this solemn occasion. And still not coming through.
I don't hear Aron.
All right, well, I will start out by saying I'm subtitling this year Out Damn Spot. There's this scene in Macbeth where Lady Macbeth goes crazy, and she's trying to get this imaginary blood stain out of her hand, and she says, "Here's the smell of the blood still. All of the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand." Oh. And so this is not a shir about dam per se, but we're definitely talking about when something will be niflat legamri. At one point, can we say that the isser within a chaticha has become sufficiently expelled such that the chaticha may or may not be permitted, along with a range of other subjects. Aron, you doing okay there? Still not coming through, huh? Do you want to try calling in? No. Okay. Maybe I will go ahead and start us up. So just a little bit of the shape of things to come. They're really going to be three main points of Sif Kuf Vav today. Siman Kuf Vav. One is going to be machloket between the Torah and the Rashba, and whether a chaticha can turn back to being mutar after an Eser has been batel. We're going to get into the connection that Joel touched on between Chanan and Afshar L'Slachto, Mutar and Aser. These are two concepts we've been throwing around for a while, and we haven't quite gotten clarity on whether they're different things, the same thing. We're also going to see a contradiction in the Shulchan Aruch over its deen of whether a piece can go back and become mutar. So we'll go through each of those in depth. Just a disclaimer, we're going to be getting a little bit into whether Chanan, Chaticha, Neaset Nevela applies for Shar Isurim and not just for Basar B'chalav. As we've seen, the Torah only holds Chanan for Basar B'chalav. The Ramah holds for Shar Isurim. So we'll touch on that, but it's not our main inyan. So there will be more to come in Sadi Bet.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we've got you, Aron.
Okay, give me 1 second to grab my headphones.
Okay. I will just.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. As Alan said, we're not going to get into all the issues of Hanan, Bashar Isurim, whether it's, Joel, can you enable screen share? Whether it's Durabanan, Doraita, etc. But we are just going to quickly review it because it will be important for understanding some of the layers.
Aron, try sharing now.
Okay. So I don't want to read the Gemara inside. I hope people get a chance to review it. But just if someone want to say the difference between Rabbeinu Tam and Rabbeinu Ephraim's Shita when it comes to Hanan. Maybe start with Rabbeinu Tam.
Yeah, so Rabbeinu Tam holds that Hanan, a piece that's Hanan, can't then transfer the Easter to other pieces because like Easter Belua like doesn't pass on. And he also holds Hanan by Sha'ar Yisurim. And then Rabbeinu Ephraim says
so Isaac, just to pause you there for a second.
Yeah.
Right, Rabbeinu Tam does hold that actually does mean that an Isra Belua does turn a Chaticha into Nevela, such that it does pass on not just the Isra Belua, but that the whole piece now counts as Nevela. Joel.
Yeah, I want to, if I can tighten that a little bit. I think Rabbeinu Tam says, but if it got it from Mino, right, and therefore it got it from Kol Shehu, then it cannot oser at Kol Shehu the same way that it was Ne'asar Kol Shehu, even though it does become Hanan. So
correct. Right. So this is right in the Gemara. We're talking about the difference between Kol Shehu and Noten Tam, which is a little in the weeds of this particular Gemara, and is not so relevant for Psak because we don't hold Min B'mino Eino Batel. But Rabbeinu Tam does hold if it's Ne'asar the Kol Shehu only with a tiny amount, then it doesn't really become Hanan. But once there's enough of the first Isser to be Noten Tam, then it does become Hanan.
Would you please repeat that, including a definition of Kol Shehu and whatever else you're comparing Kol Shehu to?
Yes. So for Rabbi Yehuda, who thinks Min B'mino Lo Batel, Min B'mino is Ne'asar the Kol Shehu. So with any amount of Isser, Min B'mino, it's Aser. But in order to make that second piece itself able to be Oser other pieces, there has to be Netinat Ta'am. There has to be a slightly more significant amount of Isser. I don't want to get into the details of this particular debate about the meme in the particular context of Min B'mino, just because I think that'll come up in Sadi Dalad, where it might we'll probably get into it in slightly more detail. But again, just broadly, Rabbeinu Tam, Hanan, in Basar B'chalav, and B'Sher Yisurim. It's not clear whether it's Doraita or Durabanan. Seems like it might be Doraita for him, but that's also another discussion. Rabbeinu Ephraim on Hanan, B'Sher Yisurim.
Okay, let's see if I got this one right since I screwed up the last one. So he doesn't hold Hanan by Sha'ar Yisurim.
Great. No Hanan and Sha'ar Yisurim. And why is there Hanan and Basar B'chalav specifically, according to Rabbeinu Ephraim? What's
I'm not sure. Let's see.
So just look at this. It's going to be in this second to last line here.
Okay.
It says,
Kol ha'haticha below sage bevitul tipa lechud mishum dechol chad chad be'afya nashe shari. Okay, so let's see.
what's unique, I think, about Basar B'chalav is that, right, Kol chad b'chad be'afya nashe shari. Each one is independently mutar, and it's only a combination. Rabbeinu Ephraim thinks there's something unique about Basar B'chalav that makes it Hanan. That does not apply to Sha'ar Yisurim. Again, this Indian is going to keep coming up in this year and in future shiurim, and I think we'll probably, when we get to Tadi Bet, really dig in on it. Just for now, keep in mind the question of is there Hanan Sha'ar Yisurim is a critical question that's going to be relevant for our shiur. With that, I will turn it over to
All right. So the first question that we're going to look at is this machloka between the Torah and the Rashba over in Kuf Vav. But before we get there, just a quick note. This Gemara is going to come up Chulin Tzadi Bet Amid Bet. We're not going to look at it inside, but I'll just make two key points that are going to arise later in the discussion. The first is this question asked by that Rav Ashi brings up, Ki misharinin b'didei misharinan, or b'maydinafik minei misharinan. So when we're looking at a case of a kachel, that this kidney weird basar b'chalav organ that's emits milk out of its pores. Udder, thank you. Biological lapse for a moment there. Do we measure against the entire volume of the kachel at the udder, or do we measure against what's come out of the udder? And the answer the Gemara gives, pshita b'didei misharinan de'i b'madanafak minei menayadinan. So we're going to measure against the entire volume of the kachel for the purposes of doing bittul, because we actually don't have a way of totally knowing exactly how much milk is being emitted from this udder in the course of its in the course of the cooking. So we go by the slumra, we make a conservative estimate. The Gemara then responds,
just Alan, maybe one thing, Alan, just one thing that is, and the reason that's the conservative estimate is just that we don't know actually how much milk was in the kachel to begin with. So the maximum amount of milk there could be is just the volume of the kachel.
Right. And it's as though every ounce of the kachel is just filled to bursting with milk particles. And then the Gemara raises this objection: okay, if you're going to say that we make this conservative estimate and assume that the entire kachel is just bursting full with milk, and it's expelled every last one of those milk particles, well, if it's expelled all of the milk out of it, then if we throw it into a pot, and we throw the kachel into another pot after it's already cooked, the kachel should not have the power to oser anything else. It's all spent. Okay, there's going to be some back and forth in the Gemara on that, but we'll get into the relevant portions in the Deah Yosef. Aron, anything you want to add there?
Yes, so I accidentally switched. Yeah, and not just that it won't have the power to oser, I think also that it shouldn't even potentially be a sewer. If the kachel has emitted all its milk, maybe it is now potentially mutar. Is that Hava Amina in the Gemara?
Thanks. Well said. Yes, that Hava Amina is eventually shot down. There's something about kachel etzmo that Rabbanan are making some sort of new statement about, but we will get further into that. Okay. Yes, and the Tosafot will talk about exactly what the issue is. But let's turn to the Torah. We are on Kuf Vav Seif Aleph. See, anyone brave volunteers to start us off? Just looking for hands here.
I can read.
So Jessica, want to start?
Sure. Okay. כתב הרשב"א, אף על פי שאין חתיכה שבעלה איסור נעשית נבלה, ואינה אסרת, אלא לפי חשבון האיסור שבעה. אף על פי כן, כשנופלת לקדרה שיש בה 60 לבטל איסור הבלוע שבה, אין ההתיכה חוזרת לקדמותה להיתרה, לפי שאיסור שבה אינו נפלט ממנה לגמרי ואינו נבלל לתוך ההיתר שבקדרה.
Amazing. Okay, so you want to just give us a general statement of the case and why the Rashba is saying what he does.
So our case is something like, maybe there's a drop of milk that's fallen on one piece of meat that's in our pot, or maybe it's not quite that case. Let's see. And the Rashba is saying, we don't consider this piece of meat to be so contaminated that it itself is like a nevela.
I'm sorry, just what did you say was falling on the meat?
I suggested a drop of milk, and then I said, but what's a maybe not, we'll see.
Yes, we're going to be talking specifically about a Shar Isurin case. So we could say Chalev or something else, but that's going to be important.
Great. Yes. Okay. So something forbidden has landed on this piece of meat. The Rashba says the piece of meat is not considered so contagiously forbidden that it would forbid other things, as like nevela would, and it's only forbidden by the kind of quantity of the issa that fell on it. But all the same, even when you've got shishim to battle the pot, that particular piece of meat never becomes permitted again, because you can never fully exude the issa from it.
Amazing. So just to be clear, what is being battled and what is it being battled against?
Great question. Okay. So he is saying, when there is 60 in the pot against the issur that fell in.
Exactly. So what needs to be battled is the issur. It's battled against the entire pot, including the chaticha that it fell on. Right. So this is the interesting chiddush here, that on one hand, the chaticha that the issur fell on is included in getting to 60, but that chaticha itself also cannot be counted as it does not become mutar, because it doesn't get as you said, Jess, doesn't get the issur out completely. When they keep going?
Sure.
Or any initial questions on that? Great, go ahead, Jess.
מה שאין כן בדבר שנבלל ונמוך, שאם נפל דם וכיוצא בו לתוך רוטב של התר, ואסרו מחמת מיעוטו, וחזר ונתרבה הרוטב של התר, עד שיהיה בו בין כולו 60 לבטל הדם, כולו מותר, שהכל נבלל ונתערב האיסור בתוך ההתר. עד כאן.
Okay, amazing. So what was different about this case?
When it's all completely stirred together, this doesn't apply.
Yes, exactly. If it's nimah the nivlau,
It's completely dissolved.
When it's in this sort of liquid state, everything becomes clear. Okay, there's the Rashba.
It's when. Okay.
Go ahead, Yemi.
Just checking. It's like when the thing that's being nimuach is the heter that got the isur on it. It's like when the whole thing is liquid as opposed to a chunk of solid. That's the difference.
My understanding is we're talking about a lach case. A drop of dam falls into another liquid. In that case,
Okay,
everything is completely absorbed. Everything is totally homogeneous. And so we don't have to worry about the issur being niflat legamre, because it's just in this undifferentiated group.
But in that case specifically, as Alan said, a drop of dam falls into a heter, and then that heter falls into another pot. You don't have to worry about it, as long as you have enough to be mevatel that.
That's assuming the heter and that the heter that it first falled on is liquid as opposed to solid. That's what you mean?
Correct. If everything involved is lach balach, as Alan said, then the Rashba would agree that there's no issue.
Rachel?
I just want to say, right, I think that the Havamina here could have been, if I say this also applies to liquids or things that melt into the second thing, right? I could be like, the whole thing's asur, right? Because you have to, you can't remove it, right? And but it's still a nevela, or it's still an isur, just like that piece of meat is an isur, which I can then remove. And if I'm batel against the initial isur that infected the first piece, I'm okay. Here I was like, well, I can't remove the liquid, so I'm stuck, right? Is the idea that this liquid is forever asur and it's inseparable. And he says, no, that's not the case. Once it's melted in, it's not that it's inseparable, but that rather it kind of goes through everything into every force in the new substance gets to be marshaled against it as well. So.
Yes, that's a good point. It's not necessarily intuitive that lach balach would be a more
Joel, when you say the word inseparable, what's that word?
It doesn't have, it's like, so I'll back up. Thanks, Ralph. Right. In the first case where you have a piece of meat, let's say, that absorbs isur, right? And even though we don't say chanan, according to the Rashba for it, if it falls into, a soup, let's say, and the meat still has its form to it, we just need 60 against the isur that's baluabo, but that piece of meat isn't mutar. You have to take that piece of meat and throw it away, right? You could have said, well, let's pretend that piece of meat became liquid. Then, well, the whole thing's asur because I can't find the liquid that absorbed the isur and throw that away. So we're kind of in a stuck position. And the Rashba says, no. Once it's melted in, then everything kind of combines against the isur, and there's nothing you have to remove anymore that maintains its isur state. So
I think once we say that we don't have chanan for sheri surim, which is where the Rashba was holding, we know from the fact that he doesn't think this piece is chanan. If the issue is that the isur is going to be more concentrated in the heter because it's a solid and not everything is niflat, then actually lach balach is sort of intuitive. It must be intuitively more kal because I don't have a chashash that it won't be homogenized. As soon as it's lach balach, it's much more likely that the isur is going to be homogeneously niflat legamre throughout the entire mixture.
Okay, we're gonna get
Finish this. Aron, finish that statement. It will be niflat through everything, and therefore
lach balach. If for the Rashba there's this piece of heter that absorbs an isur does not go back to being mutar, even if you have bitul against the isur, because we're concerned. Alan will get into a little bit more about what exactly the concern is, but concern that maybe there's a little extra isur. With lach balach, there's going to be a homogeneous distribution, so there will not be ultimately more isur in the lach heter that fell into the other heter, just because the whole thing will spread out equally.
And the tour and then the Beit Yosef are going to flesh out this discussion, no pun intended, and I think give us some vocabulary to talk about what exactly it means for something to become fully homogeneous. So let's forge ahead with the tour's response to the Rashba. Andres, I think you had found it before.
Where it says ואיני מבין.
Yes.
ואיני מבין דבריו, דכיוון שהכל מצטרף לבטלו, על כוחך הטעם מתבטל בכולו, וכיוון שמתבטל...
מתבלבל.
מתבלבל, בכל, על אם כן נתבטל. There it is.
Okay. Translator, give just a rough drift. What is how do you understand the Torah's objection to the Rashba?
So he is he doesn't agree, yeah.
Yeah. And
Because
even if you
the-
want to just literally translate, that's okay too.
Okay, so I don't understand his words because since when it mixes together and joins with the rest that is in the pot, then the ta'am.
Right, so everything is mitzaref. We combine the chaticha and the contents of everything in the pot to batel the iser that has fallen on the chaticha.
Exactly, and then of course the flavor is mitbalbel. It's like how do you say confused or mixes it also.
Yeah, totally confused. So if we're going to say that everything, i.e. the chaticha and the rest of the pot, are all combined to get us to shishim to batel the iser, al korchacha, you've got to say that the tam has mitbabel, it's spread out throughout the entire mixture, both the chaticha and the rest of the pot equally.
And if so, then it should be also considered batel.
Great. Amazing. So just as a first temperature check, what do folks think of the Rashbas versus the Torah's just logical, chemical understandings here? Which any thoughts on what feels more intuitive? Alex, yeah, not there. Yeah, did you have something, Alex or Jacob? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just thought that the issue of like intuitively, like if we see something like falling on the chaticha, so we know that it's like more limited to the chaticha. There may be an issue of ta'am, maybe I know, like it's concentrated on one spot, so it's yeah, that's for Rashba.
Yeah, Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to me it's intuitive that you can't get all the Isser out of like a piece of meat. Like you just can't get it all out. That makes sense to me with thinking about osmosis and trying to get to like there's a certain point where it will reach an equilibrium theoretically, and so it won't all get out.
Right. Okay. So there's two separate questions which we can explore a little bit later. Are we saying that all of the Isser has gotten out of the piece? That there's zero, say, chaylev remaining in this chaticha, or just that there's a 1% chaylev concentration throughout the entire mixture? I think it's probably option B, but the debate Yosef will get into it a bit. Jessica, you had a thought.
Yeah, I was going to say that my logical read on it was actually different from when you just asked about the chemical. So when I logically read it, I was like, I'm completely with the Torah. Like, either this is Hatikhat Naseit Neveda or it's not. Like, Rashba's kind of in this weird middle position. It feels very strange. But actually thinking about it chemically for a second, I'm like, oh, this makes much more sense, because it makes perfect sense that a piece of meat might be kind of, have imparted the taste of an Isser thing, but not so strongly that it's going to pass that on in a meaningful way. But that feels like chemically could be the case. I haven't studied chemistry since I was 15, so don't actually listen to me.
Amazing.
The image, in terms of the language, is a very good image. It's schita, right? So within it's not a chemical image, and for that matter, it's not the image of what the Gemara seems to refer to of it going into, right, being cooked, going into other other elements. But the image is a fantastic image of supposedly getting rid of it all. So whatever we come up with, I don't know if we can lose the image completely.
I also think that, like, I know we're going to get into this with the various definitions of this term and how this relates to Hanan, et cetera. But we're talking about like both the chemical and sort of just like intuitive relationships to this piece, right? We have the question of like, again, the way it's phrased in the Rashba, like, do we think with a piece that actually Bishaveh, whatever's in it, is being completely expelled such that this is the same as anything else? Like, it seems like on the one hand, the intuition is no, physically, we don't think that's happening. And again, obviously the Beit Yosef points out very clearly why you can believe that and still say we measure against the entire Isser, right? It's the same thing with the Chal that we say. But there's also, again, kind of relating to what Ravlandi was saying in the very language of like, Ashar l'sochto, still asor, right? That like, actually, even if you say, I really do on some level think that all of it's coming out, there is like a way in which you actually relate to that like physical piece where you're like, I know that was the Isser piece, right? Like, even if you know now everything's been mixed and like probably nothing really tastes like chaylev anymore, like even if actually you could get a kfela to taste this piece and tell you it doesn't taste like chaylev, you're like, but that was the piece that the chaylev fell on, and it's probably still kind of chaylev-y, like indelibly in my mind in some way, right? Which I think gets to both like the chemical and also sort of just the experiential aspect of this.
Beautiful.
Well, that's kind of the either chazak or shame elements, what you're saying, Lexi. It's really hard to get rid of that. I think what you're saying is correct also.
And I see your hand, Rachel. I'm going to exercise some bura and move on to Beit Yosef. I think that it'll give us explore many of these themes. I'll just say the Rashba is this sort of Lady Macbeth voice. Like once the blood falls in your hand, you're not really going to be able to like fully get it out. Okay, so let's start out with the Beit Yosef. I mean that seriously. Anyone, the brave volunteers want to start us off? I can do some calling.
I can read if you want.
Anyone who hasn't read yet? Yeah, me. Go for it.
From the beginning of Beit Yosef.
Yeah, go for it.
כתב הרשב"א, אף על פי שאין חתיכה, should I skip the, אף על פי שאין חתיכה שבליס, skip down?
Right, this is just the Rashba's entire position. It's never going to be, Chadicha is never going to be Niflat Lagamre, therefore it will never become Mutar again. Okay.
Right, and then also the Tool's opinion, and he says, ואני אומר שאיני מבין דברי רבנו, שכתב דכיוון שהכל מצטרף לבטלו. עד כאן. הטעם, על כן, על כוכך הטעם מתבלבל בכולו, כלומר כל טעם האיסור, כל טעם האיסור הבלוע בחתיכה זו מתבלבל בכל החתיכות דמינין לא להכריח כן, דאי משום,
Stop sign for a second, right?
Yeah.
So up until now, we've just been paraphrasing pretty much exactly what
paraphrasing the Tool.
Mitbalbel b'kol hachadicha, kama deminayin lo lahachriach again. But how could the Torah actually be inclining this way?
Oh yeah.
And now the Beit Yosef's going to raise a difficulty.
דאי משום דמצריכינן 60 כנגד כל האיסור, אין משם ראיה, דהה אפילו אם ברור לנו שאין הכל מתפשט ומתבלבל, אנו מצריכים 60 כנגד כולו. And if you might think that it's because we're requiring 60 against the whole thing, that's not any evidence for the Tool's claim, because even if it's clear to us that not all of it has come out and mixed into the rest of it, we still require 60 against the whole thing.
Right.
because that was the point about we take the maximum like that it could be because we don't know how much did come out, right?
Right, exactly. So he's going to spell that out based on the Gemara.
Right. וכדאמרינן גבי כחל, בדידי משערינן דאי במאי דנפק מיני מניה דינן, והחינמי דקבתה, just
Okay.
like in the, yeah. Sorry.
Yes, perfect. Good point to stop. So we're seeing that this explication of the Chumrah principle that I alluded to before in the Gemara. For the Kachel, we assume that the entire volume of the Kachel was bursting with milk and it expelled all of it. Even though we're not actually sure that that's the case. So too, for this piece of this Latifa, we're going to assume that all of the Isser has been expelled from it, such that you need Shishim against both the Chaticha and everything else in the pot. But we still retain the possibility that there's some Isser concentrated in the Chaticha so as to keep it Isser. Any good questions, clarifications, thoughts? Great. Lexi, you want to keep going? Hilchach.
Sorry, 1 moment. How many lines down are we in?
From the bold, we are. Yeah, there we go.
יוקח ודאי דברי הרשב"א עיקר. דברים אלו לא מפני עצמו אמרן, אלא מפי רבנו Ephraim. Right, so Rashba is definitely correct. And he wasn't even just like saying this off the cuff, he was actually saying it in the name of Rabbeinu Ephraim, כמו שכתב בחידושיו, פרק לא בשר, בתמה דמילתא משמע בתורת הבית הערוך, דהיינו משום דכיוון דחתיכה זו נאסרה, אי אפשר לה לחזור להתרה, אלא אם כן יהיה ברור לנו שיצא איסור זה ממנה ונתפשט בה, ובכל החתיכות בשווה, כמו שהוא בדבר הנבלל בנימוח, וכיוון שבדבר שאינו נבלל בנימוח, אין אנו יכולים לפרקם, אדרבה משמע דברור לנו שנשאר בחתיכה זו יותר חלק איסור ממה שנבלל בחתיכות אחרות. Right, that again, because like once this has become usher, once this piece has become forbidden, it is impossible to return to its like permitted state unless it is like completely clear to us that the isser has like been expelled from it and totally mixed up and everything else like equally. And we and we can know that, right? For example, in the case of something that's like totally dissolved and liquidy, we can like very clearly observe that that's the case. However, since we can't like definitively tell that that's the case with this chaticha, like, you know, the hefech, dafka, we treat it as if it is clear to us that it has remained in this piece more so meaningfully than the other things around us. And like hilkach, right? Therefore, this piece does not emerge from its forbidden status because we can't really definitively feel that the isser has left it and been equally mixed up with everything around it.
Beautiful. So far we're just as you said, Lexi, we're at the state of uncertainty. We can never really know that the enough of the isser has departed the chaticha so as to render it mutar. But that is going to raise a logical question. Go ahead.
So the Beit Yosef has an issue. V'tzmiali de'im haytama leta make fela chatichazo ve'i let beitama yisora tishtereg jari nitbarer she'yisor habalua ba niflat himena ad shelo nishar ba b'notenta. V'lama tesar? He's like, okay, I don't really get this in some ways because if it's really that we're so worried that the flavor has remained too meaningfully in this piece, then we could just get a kfela to taste this for us. And if they're like, yep, this piece doesn't taste at all chaylavi, then it should be permitted, right? Why say, oh, we just have no way of knowing if it's like fully left this piece? Like have someone taste it and we'll see. right?
Amazing.
And
It's a good question, right? If the problem is we're just not sure, why not do what we do all the way back in Siman Tzaddik and just ask an answer.
So he has an answer. V'shama yesh lamar dekevan shekavar ne'asra ad pi sheniflat k'tzat me'isor sheba l'olam asura ad shifalet lo legamre lo yishaer ba men wow. Sorry. lo yishaer ba men klal v'lo dami ledavar hanivav hanimuach shemachar she'akol mitarev ze im ze b'shaveh ve'en tosefet isor b'ne'asar b'heter. So right. So he says, okay, maybe it's that since this thing became forbidden, like in order for it to really emerge from its forbidden status, it's not that it has to have the Isor emerge from it to the extent of no longer being bino tam. It's that it has to completely have the Isor be wholly, totally expelled from it, right? And this is different with like, and he points out the very intuitive distinction between this and Lach Balach, which is that like, yeah, in Lach Balach, it just doesn't meaningfully stay a part of one thing more than the other. Everything is just all mixed together and divided. Fine, right? So you don't even have like a separate Nikar thing that was the initial Nesar chunk of Lach because it's all just completely mixed up with everything else, right? But so long as we have this Chaticha that was Nesra, it can't become permitted until actually the Isser has been just like completely and utterly expelled from it.
And that goes back to I think Rav Jill's question from earlier. It seems at the face of it that the Rashba is saying, okay, we've got to get the Isser percentage down to say these uniform 1% across the board of the entire distribution of Chaticha. And we're never going to get there for the Chaticha itself. We might get to 1.001%, but even that slight difference is enough to keep the Chaticha aser in of itself. Alternatively, what seems less plausible to me, you might say, well, we need the iser to be completely gone from the Chaticha such that there's zero in there, even less than the rest of the distribution. But I don't think that is what he's saying.
Kind of feel like that's what he's saying, but I think that's the whole point, is that I think he's kind of getting at the whole fact that when you have this chaticha, this thing that is like nivdal, that is its own separate visible thing, that actually once it's become like forbidden by a significant amount of isser, in some ways it won't be un-usser to you until you really feel like there is nothing in it, right? There's a difference between a bunch of things that you know technically have like 1% of Isser in them, but that never really had a meaningful Isser presence in them. And to the point that it never even became that bad, you're like, okay, this is really still fine. But the thing that at one point was like really bad, there is some sense in which you're like, even if I know like intuitively that there's a very meaningless amount of Isser left, it still feels like for me to actually draw a clear dividing line between its like proper Isser status and its heter, it has to be totally out, which as pointing out, like, yeah, that's probably not going to be the case. It probably is not going to be literally zero Isser in there.
Yeah, so well said. I undersold the possibility. Right, that you could call this once an Isser, always an Isser kind of reading. Aaron, go ahead.
Just to share something you and I talked about, that we see both in the Rashba's position as articulated by the Beit Yosef and the Tur, at least as the Beit Yosef describes him. Something Alan and I spoke about was in this very innocuous Siman, two deep intuitions about kashrut and everything we've learned so far coming into conflict with each other, where the Rashba's intuition is once something, as we said, once aser, always aser. And that makes sense. And the Torah's intuition, at least up to Beit Yosef, even though the Beit Yosef thinks it's wrong, and we may say that the Taz defend the Torah, that, okay, if we're making all these assumptions about requiring 60 against Isser Balua, et cetera, once we make an assumption, we have to carry that assumption through. We can't just make assumptions the Chomer this way, and then make an assumption the Chomer this way, and make an assumption the Chomer this way. We have to stick with one set of assumptions and at least try to pretend that our assumptions are describing reality. Or if our assumptions have no basis in reality, then we maybe should have a different set of assumptions. But we see sort of from the Rashba, the sort of intuitive gut feeling about an Isser, and from the Torah, the logical, what's really going on with Kashrut and Tarovet in general. And these two things are mutually incompatible. And the question of whether the Chaticha goes back to being Mutar is at the center of these two titanic positions about how Kashrut operates.
This is important what you're saying. Could you label these two intuitions again? The Rashba and the Torah's intuition? And we'll use the word intuition. Okay, but I think it's not a bad term. But you call the Rashba's intuition, what would you call it?
I would say like
Empirical intuition or what?
Yeah, intuitive empiricism and Torah's logical consistency.
You okay with that, Aron?
Yeah, or you might say the Rashba has this sort of balabatish impulse of, I know what an Isser is, and the Torah is sort of this elite rabbinic formalist intuition about how does kashrut work.
And then
I'm not sure who you insulted the more in this, calling the Rashba a balabais and calling the Torah a formalist, but we got a personal labels thing. Sarah, you got to call it Sarah. Sarah, what do you got, Sarah?
I wonder whether it's the other way around, right? That the intuition is not like the intuitive thing is like, how much Isser is there? And the formalist is the one who's saying the very fact that there was this particular interaction, like moves it into this new category we call novela. And therefore that formally has a different thing, no matter what's inside of it. Like, actually, maybe the categories go the other way. And like the Rashba is the formalist here.
In this case,
Rashba is the formalist and the other guy, the Torah is the what?
And the Torah is intuitive because the Torah is talking about like how much Isser is there in the thing. He's not talking about like the formal structure of this haticha now like underwent some change and therefore because it's undergone the change, now we treat it in a different category.
But I feel like the relating of the exact ratio is less.
Oh, just that important here that the Rashi does not hold Chanan for Share Yisurim. So he does not.
Yeah, no, but the general like the general sense that it once it goes one way, once it becomes Aser, it can't become not Aser. Like that whole idea seems to be born of a formalist notion. Is what I think I'm trying to say.
Of that, right? He doesn't hold Chanan b'Shar Yisurim, but he does still hold this, which feels like it comes from an intuitive like heebie-jeebies around like the thing that became like that like became Aser, and I don't really think that piece is ever going to be fine again, right? Like from the fact that he doesn't hold Chanan, but he still holds that, it feels like there is something that is intuitively troubling him about this, even though the formal category of Chanan doesn't.
Right. So on that note, I just want to look not too much inside, but there's a little interesting piece of the at the end of Beit Yosef. The Rashba actually has a tshuva specifically on this question. He explains basically what he says in Siman Aleph, that the Chaticha gets mitzaref to Batel, but he says something interesting, 4 lines from the end of the Beit Yosef. Deah, she'im haya afshar lisvot et ha'isur sheba v'halot et ha'isur hi etzman mutereti. So if it were possible in the subjunctive, right? If it were theoretically possible to expel all of the Isser, and then the piece would become mutar. But since it's not, the piece remains aser. This is just an interesting phrasing here that the Rashba admits at least the theoretical possibility that the Chaticha could be fine, but also that it's never actually going to happen. Okay. Game plan for the next 12 or so minutes. I want to take a quick look at the Bach, who has a slightly different reading of the Torah than Beit Yosef, and then jump ahead to the Taz on this issue. So let's pick up with the Bach. Aaron, do you want to screen share again there? You have that?
I don't have it up. I just have we're going from the Zesha Katav.
Right. So we are looking.
Which is
if you look
about
at
2/3 of the way down.
Right, Shira Tavara. If you look at in the main text of the Torah, the line Shehakol, 3 lines from the bottom, and then just move over to the right. You'll see the Zesha Katav. Folks with us?
That part?
Yes. So the Bach is about to offer his understanding of.
Just so people can find it, it's right after, right? You have Siman Sadi Bet, and then in parentheses Seif Chet or Samechet. So maybe that'll help people.
Can we get a thumbs up when folks have it? Still getting there. Right. About 2/3 of the way down on the Bach.
Joel, can you just repeat what you just said again?
Yeah, in my version of Shirat Dvorah, because there are 2 different versions floating out there. It's right before it. There's a parentheses that has in smaller type. It's Samechet, it's Seif Chet, because he's referring back to Siman Sadi Bet there, and it's also like 3 lines up in the narrow lines, before the lines get wide from my version, but they're different versions again.
Yeah. Okay. If folks are still having trouble finding it, and maybe for the sake of time, I will just briefly summarize. It's not a crucial point here. Essentially, the Bach says since all of the Chaticha are combined with the Chaticha that this are fell on, you've got to say the taste spread everywhere, because if you're not going to say that, and you say that there's a little bit of Isser that's still on the Chaticha more than in the others, how could the Chaticha possibly be combined to batel the Isser? Adarab, it's actually Shim b'Chaticha b'Batelata Chaticha Kula Shemet Yisrael. And if we're going to say there was more concentration on the Chaticha that the Isser fell on, we would actually need to batel that Chaticha itself. So that, by the fact that we're using the Chaticha and the count to 60, we've got to say that it has no more concentration of Isser than anything else in the mixture. That's basically the Bach's reading of the Torah's logic. Quick thoughts, reactions, questions?
I feel like the whole thing is like kind of silly because he's imposing the Hanan framework on something. The whole point is that the Torah and folk don't hold that here, right? That like, and whatever, that'll get into the rest of our conversation about how separable or not these concepts are. But like his whole argument, the Bach feels kind of the most formalist to me, at least in his explanation of the Torah. What we have here is like, oh, if it's combining to batel, like the piece itself is combining to batel the Isser, it must be that it's not like any at all unequally distributed. Otherwise, the whole thing would be Hanan. No, it wouldn't be, because they don't hold by that principle with Shari Sorim. And we still think that there is the heter substance of the meat that is serving to dilute the flavor of the Isser, certainly as it spreads through the rest of the things. And it feels completely intuitive to say that like that heter meat is part of the sum total that is diluting the substance of the flavor, and still the flavor is more concentrated in that meat than it is in other things, right? Those just feel like deeply separable things. And it feels like he's very in a Hanan framework, but kind of the whole point of this Siman is that the Torah and Co are not.
Right. This whole question of what exactly is intuitive is a prickly one. I see your hand. I want to take the next 7 minutes or so to look at one last layering on to this Tor Rashba Pylon, and that is the Taz on our Siman. So it's Kufav and the Shulchan Aruch, the first Taz there on the page. I'll give folks a second. Okay, folks there? I'm just gonna, I think I'll briefly summarize the first section of the Taz and then let someone else read for a little bit. Okay, so we saw that the Beit Yosef raised a question on the Torah based on this Kachel passage in the Gemara. And the Taz says, Ani Omer, Shekol Ikar Hochachad Rabbeinu, who mean Sugya de Kachel. Actually, the Torah had that same Sugya in mind when he was raising his point about the peace becoming mutar. And the Taz deduces this from the Gemara's objection we saw earlier, Ela ma'ata naflala kedera charet lo ya'asar. The Gemara thinks, well, if we're going to say that the kachel expelled all of its milk and make this very chomer assumption, then we've got to say that's it. The kachel has expelled everything that it has in it, and therefore, when if it falls into another kedera, not only is there not a problem of osering anything, the piece itself should be mutar. The Gemara is then going to come back and say that the kachel itself is aser for other reasons, but then the Tosafot adds some detail here. They say, well, the kachel it has its gumot. It's holding back these little pouches of milk here, which is one of the reasons that might make it different. Just trying to see what a good place for to pick up for a discussion would be. Let's pick up. Yeah.
Alan, I'm wondering if maybe we should pause there and take a break.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's a little bit of an involved passage. So let's give folks 5 minutes and jump back in. We'll reconvene at 10:06.
Still not working, right?
The Zoom is still not working?
Ah, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Aaron. Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
wow. Okay, 1 second. Put in my other headphones now.
Voices are being heard. So, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Empowering us to speak up. Okay.
Now, the moment we've all been waiting for, what's been lurking in the background of this whole discussion potentially, is what the relationship is between Hanan and Efshar Softo. You can still hear me, right?
Before we get there, can I just very briefly tie up the Taz and the neat note for everyone? Okay.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, you're fine. We see you. The Taz, in short, you can all enjoy it on your own time, explains that the Torah was actually drawing from the sugya on kachel as well. The Torah is basing himself on this objection from the Gemara, Ela ma'ata, that really a kachel should emit, when it emits all of its chalav, then theoretically it should become mutar for all intents and purposes. That is not the case for reasons that are specific to the kachel, i.e. kachel is a basar b'chalav mixture. The milkiness gets mixed up with the meat during the cooking process. That's something that would happen to any basar b'chalav piece. However, for shari surim, like the case that we're talking about, really the chaticha should expel all of its iser, and the chaticha should be able to convert back and become mutar. So the Torah's reasoning is all totally sound. However, according to the Taz, we do hold chanan the shari surim, so absolutely nothing that the Torah had to say, which he went so painstakingly defended up until this point, is practically relevant. So you can just forget everything we just said. Okay, Aron, over to you.
Great. And the one source we didn't get to see is the Sitei Dot, who says if Eliyahu came and said there was no iser left in the chaticha, then we would make it mutar again. But again, as Alan just said, because we hold chanan for shari surim, in some ways, actually, none of this siman is so practically relevant, because the question, as we're going to see, of is chanan and efshar l'sochto aser the same thing or interrelated concept, and necessarily a if and only if concept, doesn't matter if you hold chanan, because then you automatically hold efshar l'sochto aser. Though the Ron actually raises havamina. That's not necessarily the case. We're not going to look at that. For our intents and purposes, essentially, this is an opportunity to learn about the different pieces of kashrut that we've been seeing and how they play out together. In terms of halacha l'maaseh, much of the siman is not so practically relevant. But we're going to talk now about efshar l'sochto, aser, mutar, and just to review what Alan said, maybe let's list the different possibilities when people say efshar l'sochto aser. How we might define it. And right, again, just efshar l'sochto means even if you can squeeze out some amount of iser, this chaticha is still aser. So let's list some of the possible explanations or nuances of what efshar l'sochto aser might mean.
Well, two of the ones I saw where one of them is the idea that like actually efshar l'sochto aser means efshar l'sochto, like means that we just actually don't think it is ever going to really be fully out meaningfully. Another one is that like efshar l'sochto actually maybe to the extent that it is equally shared with other things, but that once something has become really aser-y, like even if what is in it can be mostly meaningfully expelled, we still don't think the thing can revert to its heter. And then we do also, we've seen this less in what we've looked at now, but we see it being used basically synonymously with chanan, that the entire thing becomes just like its own iser.
Okay, great. So one is efshar l'sochto. If it were possible to get all of the iser out, it would be mutar, but it's not possible. Or efshar l'sochto, it is possible to get some of the iser out, but not enough of the iser out, such that there's still a slightly higher concentration of the iser. And then it's aser until it's an equal concentration and you won't reach an equal concentration. Lexi pointed out another possibility is it means the same thing as chanan. This piece has become nevela. A fourth possibility that's just suggested by some of the people who argue against it is even if in a theoretical, totally formal world, we actually could be sure that there was no iser left in this piece, it would still be aser. There is a fifth possibility we really won't talk about, which is that for some people, actually, this whole term appears to mean something totally different. We won't talk about that. Maybe we'll give it as like a treat at the end. So first, let's look at the Bach on our Siman, the same Bach, but further up on the page. So we're going to go to back
Aron,
to
can I ask you a question just to that fourth
Yes.
suggestion that you had, right? How is that different from Hanan?
how is that different from Hanan? You might say it does
And
not oster.
Joel, when you say a fourth, you then need to say which one is that?
The
Right,
fourth suggestion. Yeah.
The fourth one I suggested was even if Eliyahu came, and this is a totally formal understanding of this principle. Even if we were 100% sure that 100% of the Isser were gone, this piece is still Aser. The difference between that and Hanan is that doesn't necessarily mean it would be Oser. But just to bring this conversation back into this debate Alan laid out between the Torah and the Rashba, let's look at the Bach. If you see Ulafi Oniyadati, it's about 8 lines down in the new Shira Devora. It's after he's described the Tur and the Beit Yosef's refutation of the Tur. Great. Does someone want to read? Sarah, could you read?
Sure. Oh, I just found this place. Okay. Ulafi ani dati de Rabbeinu heven data rashba al nachon. Desfirale kevan da chaticha zo ne'esra I efshar la lachzor lahetera da efshar lasochato asur. Should I keep going? Bikol isurin aval gav de lo amrinan chatichat man asay nevela. Vahaitama de barur lanu shenishar chaticha zo isur yoter ktat mimasha nivla b'chaticha chatichot acherot. Hilkach lo yatzda ha'chaticha zo me'isura ad olam.
Great. So to summarize, what does the Bach think the Tur thinks the Rashba thinks?
So the Bach thinks the Tur correctly has read that Rashba is saying the following thing, that that chaticha is, once it becomes asar, it can never become mutar again because of the principle of shar l'sochato asur, because we even though we don't say Hanan here, it's nonetheless clear to us that this piece has a little bit, like it's more concentrated in this piece than in all the other pieces.
Great. And so in terms of the formal concepts here, Efshar l'sochato and Hanan are independent variables that may have some overlap, but they are not, it's not if and only if.
Right. They're not conceptually linked. It's just the case that, I mean, he acknowledges that you might think that, right? Just by the way
he's going to say,
it.
He's going to follow it with the Torah and explain as we'll state.
Which, by the way, this does go back to the question of, are we looking at 1.0001% versus 1%, or is there niflat again, right?
Right. We actually don't need to. Here, the Bach is not actually defined exactly which definition of Efshar l'sochato aser, or even the phrase Efshar l'sochato he is referring to. Whatever it is, it may or may not be conceptually linked to Hanan. So Sarah, can you read just from the Afal Pichen?
Ve'afal pichen hisiga lav Rabbeinu lemay desfirle dechada talia beidach de babasar v'chalav dechanan hilkach efshar lasochato asur. So basically, he's going to say, well, the Tur then disagrees with the Rashba about whether efshar lasochato and Hanan are connected, and says that in fact they are connected.
Mm-hmm.
Hilkach efshar l'sochato asur uvashar isurin de lo amrin Hanan efshar l'sochato nami share.
Great, straightforward. The Bach has a fairly formal reading of this entire machloket. One side, the Rashba holds Efshar l'sochato aser and Hanan are not mutually contingent, and the Torah holds that they are mutually intertwined. You can't have one without the other. And just to maybe put a finer point on the relationship between these two things, right? Hanan describes essentially a chaticha's ability to do what?
To oser other things.
To oser other things. It also describes asurness, but even if it wasn't chanan, it would still be aser, right? And efshar l'sochto aser mutar describes a chaticha's
Userness, whether it's
Yeah,
Userness.
its own state.
right. So, right, to put this back right in the most Pachu terms, is something if we say that something cannot be oser something, does that necessarily mean that it could become mutar again? For the Torah, as soon as if something cannot be oser, then it can become mutar. For the Rashba, just because something does not oser does not mean it's not asur forever. For another just brief, I think, brief summary of some context here, we're going to look at Be'er Hagra on Kuf Vav Siv Katan Gimel. So back to the Shulchan Aruch. We will eventually get to what the Shulchan Aruch thinks. For the context, here, and I'll talk about this later. In Kuf Vav, he rules like the Rashba. In Sadi Bet, he rules like the Torah. So here in Kuf Vav, he's ruling like the Rashba, and the Gra is commenting on this. Someone want to read Be'er Hagra?
I think it's the Gimel. Yeah.
I can read. Yeah.
Great.
After in Chanan B'Shar Yisurin, B'Efshar L'Sochto, Ein Chiluk. Uchamasa K'tav Aron B'Sof Perik Kol Basar, D'Efshar L'Sochto, V'Chanan D'Efshar L'Sochto V'Chanan Shnei Inyanin in
Okay, pause. So
Yeah.
what does the Ron say about these two things?
that they're two concepts. They're two separate concepts. V'zesher K'tav Gemara Ikasavar Efshar L'Sochto Mutar Amaychule.
We'll pause there because that's going to take us to the Gemara. So I want to look at briefly, thank you, Jacob. So I'm going to share my screen again. We're going to look at two passages, actually just two sentences in the Gemara. So this is Kuf Chet. First is on Amud Aleph. This is when Rav describes Chanan. Rav says, as soon as one piece is given time to the other piece, that piece is Chanan. And then the Gemara asks, Umay Kasavar. What does Rav hold about Efshar L'Sochto? I Kasavar Efshar L'Sochto Mutar, Chaticha Amay Nese Nevela. Ela Kasavar Efshar L'Sochto Aser. So, based on that Gemara, again, without being so inside the Gemara, but again, Rav has said, this thing is Chanan, and the Gemara says, well, what do you hold about Efshar L'Sochto? If you hold Efshar L'Sochto Mutar, why Chanan? Must be that he holds Efshar L'Sochto Aser. What do we intuitively see as the relationship between Chanan and Efshar L'Sochto? Sarah?
Yeah, it seems like the Stam thinks that they're connected.
The Stam seems to think they're connected. Why?
Because otherwise this is basically what the Gra says, right? That the response, only makes sense if you think that saying Efshar L'Sochto Mutar is incompatible with saying Chanan, and conversely. So it must be that these two things go together, because otherwise mapping out his position on the question of Efshar L'Sochto doesn't explain why he holds Chanan.
Okay, so great. Definitely seems like from the Pshat of the Gemara there's a relation. I'm not sure is what the Gra is saying, because the Gra is talking about the Ran, who thinks they're two different things. Yavni.
But it's the relationship, but not that they're like necessarily like it's necessary but not sufficient, or vice versa, right? Like you certainly can't say Hanan without saying Efshar Sochto Asur, because it can't be Oser without being Asur, but maybe it can be Asur without being Oser. In which case, like you could still have, you see what I mean? You could still have Efshar Sochto Asur and not have Hanan. You just can't have Efshar Sochto Mutar and have Hanan.
Jacob, I actually want you now to read that line from the Gra where he's citing the Ran. Starting the Ehen.
The Ehen Devar Acher.
Echad.
Echad. Okay. Oh yeah, that. Devar Echad Lo Sayach Amai Ayin Sham.
So, Jacob, do you want to translate?
Yeah. So if they are actually one thing, this line in the Gemara of Amai, it's not relevant. If it's like, you have to have them be distinct things with this explanation of being able to, like, I can't put it quite as Yavni put it, but you have to have a distinction for this line to make any sense.
Right. For me to even have the Hava Amina that Rav could say Efshar Sochto Mutar, but the piece is Hanan, I must not think that they're necessarily tied together. So those are just, I think, those are broadly the two intuitions about the sugya. As Sarah said, the Gemara obviously seems to think there is an intuitive connection. And at the same time, the specific phrasing of the Gemara, you could read as suggesting there's not a clear connection. There's some sort of connection, but not a definitive connection. Rav Landis.
I'm not sure where to put this in the right place. Maybe you said it and I didn't catch it. Hanan, a good part of the conversation is how does something become Hanan? That's a conversation. And how does something else become Hanan? After Osofto is a conversation, how do you leave the status? How do you leave that status of being Hanan? Leaving the status is a different kind of conversation. That even if you're leaving the status, it might be that once you've had the status, then you have the status. You have a chazaka, or you have the shame. When I first learned this as a kid, as a young kid, that's what I thought it was, the difference between the two.
Great. I think that's a good distinction. Hanan is how you become something.
All the conversation Hanan is about how does this become Hanan, and how does something else become Hanan? How does Hanan make something else Hanan? After Osofto is you have a status already. How do you leave that status? Anyway, that's my chiddush when I was 10 years old. I first learned Yoreh.
Well, all right. Well, you've got a lot of years on us. Rav Joel.
Well, I had a different problem. The school sent a note back to my parents that I was borderline retarded. And the question was, what should be done? So my Zadie says, I'll learn Yoreh with him and see what happens. So he came back and he said, I don't know if he's retired or not, but he can learn Yoreh. So that was the end of that. Anyway, that's what I said then when I was 10. Here's the end of it. So when you have that, you have already a status. Leaving a status is a whole different question. Anyway, I'm done. I'm sorry.
So I think that, as Rav said, that's an intuition why these might not necessarily be the exact, not the exact same thing, but not necessarily two definitively interrelated concepts. Rav Joel.
Yes, it is just another chiluk between the two things, assuming that they're not completely coupled or they're not completely that they're coupled, but not the same thing necessarily. Is not just if it's asur versus oser, but also you can imagine if efshar sochto asur, but you don't hold Hanan, right? You would have chaticha. It couldn't become a chaticha riyali kabed, right? And so therefore that thing could be batel in terms of like as a piece itself, because it's still an isur balua and not an isur itself. So it's a very subtle, but it could be another chiluk there between those two categories. So
great, and that's going to come up in the Shach's discussion of the Shulchan Aruch's apparent contradiction of himself. We might not actually get into it specifically, but yes, in this whole context we've been talking about, if you hold Efshar L'Sochto Aser, but you don't hold Chanan, you have to take it out if you can see it. But if you can't see it, or you don't notice it, or you don't know which one it is, even if it's a Chaticha really dead, it's Batal Barov. Whereas if you hold Chanan, it actually has no Bitul if it's a Chaticha really Kabed. Okay, one last just short Gemara where I think we again see these two intuitions play out. Can someone read this Gemara? I'll even make it shorter. You know all the words in it. Great, thanks, Ruben.
ואפשר לסוחתו עצמו תנאי. דתניא, טיפת חב שנפל החתיכה, כיוון שנתנה טעם בחתיכה, החתיכה עצמה נעשית נבלה, ואוסרת כל החתיכות כולם, מפני שהם מינה, דברי רבי יהודה, וחמורים עד...
Great, you pause there. Thank you, Ruben. What's the relationship here between Efshar L'Sochto and Chanan? The Gemara just did something very tricky. Joel.
It essentially just equated them, right? It slipped it in of like, it started with the question about Efshar L'Sochto, and then replaced the words, or essentially had the words, right? Chanan, as its way of answering that there's a Tanaitic opinion about Efshar L'Sochto, right? So.
Great, and if we look at the Aruch HaShulchan, can I get a quick reader?
I could give it another shot if you want. Oh, you have
great, Ruben.
והנה באמת בסוגיה בטיפת חלב, מבואר להדיע באחד המלתהי, שהרי אומר שם בפלוגתא אפשר לסוחתו, דתנאי, מביא תנאים דפליגי בענייני דחתיכה מעשה נבלה, ולמה לא דחה שאז תאם עניין זה לזה. Yeah. So basically that is just saying like, why like are they like replaceable like that? Like just doesn't make sense.
Or the fact that they are replaceable seems to clearly indicate that they're one thing. The Aruch then offers an answer to his question, but then this is what he seems to ultimately think, is they are clearly the same thing. I hope you didn't puzzle too much over the Ron. Essentially, the Ron's main point is the 7 words that the Gra quoted. I apologize for not making that clear. But you can say there is on one side of the debate, we have Rashi, the Rosh, the Tur, maybe the Shulchan Aruch. No, I got the Shulchan Aruch backwards. This is actually slightly bad. The other one is scoop up, but fix it later. And the Aruch HaShulchan, who thinks they're one thing. The Rashba, the Ron, and the Shulchan Aruch elsewhere think they are the same thing. Think they're 2 different things. I'll pause there. Any questions? I know we threw a lot of material. Also keep in mind that, again, because we hold Chanan for Shari Surim, the consensus is once you hold Chanan, then you definitely hold Efshar L'Sochto Aser, since that is the paradigm when it comes to Basar B'Chalav, that we hold both Chanan and Efshar L'Sochto Aser. Any questions?
Yeah, I would also just add that this you could reduce a lot of this to just a plain methodological reading question of the Gemara, right? On one hand, if we take our the Amai point that raised by the Gra, right, we have and Hanan can possibly be the same thing. Otherwise, that sentence becomes a tautology. But as the Rosh Hashanah points out, this is the slipping in and substitution strongly suggests that they're identical, and it's hard to square that circle.
Great. And also you'll notice in none of these sugyot we actually define what Efshar Sochto Aser means. The Gemara seems to assume we know it. From the Ritva that we actually cut, that I also hope you didn't trouble over too much, but you can see actually in the Rashba and the Ritva and other places, we will not get into this because it will make all this much more confusing. They actually seem to use the phrase Efshar Sochto Aser to mean what we mean by Hanan. And for the thing we mean when we say Efshar Sochto Aser, they don't have a term for it. They actually just describe it. So if you later go back and read the Gemara, you actually see the term Efshar Sochto Aser might mean something totally different than the thing we think it means. At the end of the day, the Ritva and the Rashba still do think these, whatever we want to call these things, one's ability to be Oser and one's status as Aser, those for them still remain two separate things. With that, I will pass it back to you, Alan.
Okay. So we're moving from at least what I found to be a difficult semiotic, interpretive, philosophical discussion to a fairly straightforward stira contradiction between two parts of the Shulchan Aruch, and four solutions that are laid out there. So let's flip over to the Shulchan Aruch, study Bet Daled in Bater B'Chalav. And we're just going to read one little chunk there. Anyone want to take that piece together? We got thumbs up.
Sorry, could you say it again? Where we're going?
Shulchan Aruch, study Bet Daled, deep Daled. Okay, folks are there. Ruben, you want to read?
Sure, I can give it a shot. לא אמרו חתיכת זמן נעשית נבלה, אלא בבשר וחלב. אבל לא בשאר איסורים, כגון כזית חלב שנפלה בחתיכה, ואין בה 60 לבטלו. ונסחה, ואחר כך בשליים אחרות, אין צריך אלא 60 כדי כזית חלב. You want me to translate?
Just keep going a couple more words.
ואז אפילו החתיכה עצמה חוזרת להיות מותרת.
Amazing. Okay. Yeah, go ahead and summarize. Yeah, no, go ahead. You can jump it.
So the Shulchan Aruch is basically saying that the concept of chaticha nasid nivela only applied to basar v'chalav. But in the other isurim, like for example, you have a kazait of grease that fell onto a piece of meat, and there isn't 60 to mevatel that piece of meat, and it was nisar, and after that it was cooked with other pieces of meat, which kind of creates a 60 to be mevatel the kazait. So in this case, even the chaticha kind of like changes status and becomes once again mutar.
Amazing. And as Aron said, we're not going to get too much into the question of Din Hanan here. We know the Ramah is going to drill Hanan the Shar Isurin. But the key point here is just those last couple of words. So now let's flip ahead back to our Siman Kuf Vav. We are still on Siman Aleph. Scanning this up. Right. So let's see how the Shulchan Aruch reads here. Someone wants to start us off and just go through the whole first part of Siman. Yavni, you want to take us through?
חתיכה שבלעה איסור ואין בה 60 לבטלו, שנפלה לקטירה, אינה אוסרת אלא לפי חשבון איסור שבה, שאם יש במה שבקטירה מצורף עם החתיכה עצמה, 60 כנגד איסור הבלוע בה, מותר מה שבקטירה. Should I translate or keep going?
Read the next couple of words.
אבל החתיכה עצמה אסורה לפי שאיסור שבה אינו נפלט ממנה לגמרי.
Okay, pause there for a second. So who is, I mean, this is basically straight out of the Torah, but who is the Shulchan Aruch Paskening like?
This is like the Rashba, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
If you look one word ahead in the parentheses, you will see that. Right, Eina niflat mimena legamri. But there's a problem which the Rama is going to point out. So just skip down from the citations to וכן עיקר.
וכן עיקר ודלא כמו שכתב לעיל סימן צדי ב' דאף אותה חתיכה מותרת.
Perfect. Okay, stop there. So what's the steer here? What's your problem?
Is this issue of whether or not that piece is mutar once we've calculated what's going on with the rest of, if it's enough to batal it for the rest of the soup that it fell into, whether the piece itself can be mutar or not. In Sadi Bet, he seems to say it can be, and here it seems to say he can't be. He seems to say it can't be.
Right, and it makes sense that the Rama rules this that rules what we see in Kufav, that the Chaticha is aser because the Chanan holds Chanan the Shari Syrian. However, that doesn't explain why we have this contradiction to begin with. So we're going to see a couple of attempts to resolve that. But first, so we're going to see that we need to flip back to Tzadi Bet. What happens.
Alan, just before we move forward, like just from the reading itself, it seems to be talking about different cases, right? So the first one that we've read, it's like whatever, there is 16 in the there is 60 in the kedera, but this one's like mesuraf im hachaticha atzma. The 60 is only created with the chaticha itself. Well, it seems to like not include the chaticha itself in the first case we looked at.
I'm not totally seeing them as different cases here. Back in Sadi Bet Daled, we were also talking about a chaticha that is Shari Surin that gets counted to batel, the isser that has fallen on it. Those seem to be the same in both cases. The only difference that comes up is whether the chaticha itself is mutter or not. Where are you seeing that in Sadi Bet?
So in Tzadik Bet, it doesn't mention Metzuraf im hachaticha atzma. All I'm saying is that Kuvav seems to be talking about a specific case where you only get the shishim through the chaticha itself. Well, Tzadik Bet is talking about a case where you have 16 in the kedera, and then you have 16 in the kedera keneged chaticha, and you don't include the chaticha in the 60. But I could be like, it's just a reading. Like I could be totally wrong.
Right, in Sadi Bet we say answer shishim kazay chayla, and we're assuming that the chaticha becomes mutar. We'd be able to say that the chaticha is not in the minyan of the 60, but that it does become mutar. I suppose not logically impossible. Aron, any thoughts on this?
I think, yeah, I don't.
It's vague. It is vague wording, and
It's an interesting chiluk. Yeah,
No, but I agree with Alan.
Could
That
be.
it's kind of a confusing wording, and like Tzadik Bet could be read either way.
Okay. So
yeah, I think I think it probably is intending to describe the same situation just because the Torah is describing the same situation in both cases. So it would be unusual for the Shulchan Aruch to take the language of the Torah and slightly change the situation in a very specific way to make a different deen. Especially
Kazayit implies that everything besides that Kazayit of Isser is the Shishi.
The other is that the Beit Yosef on the Torah in Kuv Vav makes it rules the same way as the Shulchan Aruch does here. In which and the Torah has slightly less specific language. So it seems like the Beit Yosef with or without the Chaticha counting. Though actually in Kupav the Chaticha does count, but I think like it's not like Lav Davka.
Okay, but nice catch. Did not pick up on that and maybe through. But let's take a look at how the Shach and the Taz are going to deal with this stira in back in Sadi Bet. So we are on page Reish Kaf Bet in the Shulchan Aruch. We got a thumbs up right there. Amazing. Let's start with the Shach. Lexi, you wanna take it?
Sure. So we're looking at the Shach.
Yud Aleph.
Right. Sadi Bet. I'm not looking at all at Torah. Okay, so the Azafil Chatichat Machozer Liat Muteret Tema. The Lakaman Rosh Siman Kafav. כתב דחתיכה עצמה עומדת בייסורה, לפי שהייסור שבה אינו נפלט ממנה לגמרי הקם לשונו. Right, this is surprising because beginning of Siman Kafav, we were just reading, he says that the chaticha remains aser because the isur is not completely expelled from it. והרב בהגה הבין שהם דברים סותרים זה את זה, כדי שלא יהיה...
Everything we just said, go ahead.
Yeah. וכדי שלא יסתרו בדברים זה עם זה, כן כתב בפירוש נראה לי מה שכתב כאן רוצה לומר, לפי שכתב מקודם, גבי בשר בחלב, דאף דרוטב מותר בשישים, מכל מקום חתיכה באיסורה עומדת, ואם הייתה ראויה להתכבד ואינו מכירה, אינו בטלה באלף, וכמה שמלן, זה אין כן בשאר איסורים, אלא דבטל ברוב כשאינו מכירה, כיוון דאינו איסור מחמת עצמה, שלכמן רסימן כפלד, ואז אפילו חתיכה עצמה חוזרת להיות מותרת, ומותר לאכול כולם, ואינו צריך להשליך אחת מהם שלכמן. So he has this smart chiluk that the difference is actually about the piece being butt-held amongst other pieces, right? That like even if within like the piece itself in Shari Sorim, like there isn't shishim, right, to butt-held it, like pieces can be butt-held amongst others, right? And it isn't considered like a davar harayalit kabed, chaticha harayalit kabed, right? Even if the thing itself hasn't been butt-held, because it's only aser from what it has absorbed. Whereas, like in the case of basar b'chalav, it is considered to be like the iser itself, right? And so the piece is not batel afilu be'elef, right? Even in 1,000 other pieces. And that's what he means that like this piece amongst other pieces can choser liyot, like this piece can be batel amongst other pieces of meat, right? But not that just by it being expelled into some stew or whatever, right? That it'll be mutar, but just that like the piece can be batel barov. Right, so it actually, according to the Shach, like he's saying that here, because we're teaching this in adjacent to Basar B'chalav laws, he's like teaching basically the bit about, you know, when something becomes the Isser itself and needs to, and like a Chatichara, etc., and wouldn't be batel at all as a piece, even amongst other things. Whereas when it's Shari Sorim, again, the thing itself could be batel amongst other pieces of meat. It's just that basically the Shach reads this comment for it to not be a stira as just not actually really referring to Efshar L'Sochto.
Right. Do other folks catching that there? The distinction between that and yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's take a look at the over at the Taz. It's going to offer a different resolution here. It's a very short one.
Do you want me to read the Taz also?
Let's see. Alex, would you be able to read?
Where are we? I'm sorry, because
we're on the Taz Yud, which is right across from the Shach that we just read in Sadi Bet.
Okay. Okay, great. Because I'm going there. And Taz Yud. It was done in a bit. Okay. Okay, great. ואז אפילו חתיכה עצמה וכולי, נראה דכן כתב לפי מה שכתב הטור, דלא אמרינן אפשר לסוחתו אסור בשאר איסורים. ממילא אפשר לסוחתו מותר, והחתיכה עצמה מותרת. ועין לאל בסימן ק"ז, סימן א', כתב להפך מזה הוא האמת. Okay, so
does the Taz seem does the Taz come up with any resolution to this Deah? What's its solution?
Seems resolution.
Trick question. Just that he contradicted himself. Katab lahafek mizeh. He's right in Kufav. He's wrong here. And as a reminder, he's writing Kufav because the Taz holds Chanan, the Shar Yisurim. Therefore, the piece is going to remain Asur. Okay, we're running short on time here, so just very quickly, two last explanations back on Kufav. I think I'll just briefly summarize them. No need to go too far inside. So back on Yoreh Kufav Dalid. The Gra is just going to make the claim that back in Sadi Bet, when the Shulchan Aruch says that the Chatifa goes back and becomes Mitar, he's just quoting the Torah over there. That's not his real opinion. He actually thinks what he says in Kufav, that the Chatifa remains Asur. And then finally we get the Ber Hagala, also on the same page, Ber Hagala Gimel. Lost my own spot here for a second. Yeah, Ber Hagala Gimel, up on the right side of page Sadi, just explains. Okay, Deoraita, the Chaticha is Mutar. Derabanan, it is Asur. The Shulchan Aruch is reporting the Deoraita opinion back in Sadi Bet, Derabanan opinion here in Kufav. Okay, with that, I will turn things over to Aron for unless anyone has any questions on this basic machloket here. So.
Just in terms of the Gra versus the Taz on Sadi Bet, they seem to kind of have the same opinion, right? That in one place he's just kind of copying the Torah, and in the other place he's actually giving his own opinion, right? So I'm not sure. Maybe you can explain. There's maybe a difference between the Gra and the Taz in those two places.
I didn't see did not see the Taz mention that the Shulchan Aruch is specifically copying the Torah here. He seems to just say that there is a contradiction, and that the opinion in Kufav is the correct one. But
right, I think as you said in Sadi Bet, he's saying the Shulchan Aruch ruled like the Torah, and he didn't rule like the Torah. He contradicted himself, and one was right. I think the Gra is just saying I think is a fine distinction. He just was repeating what the Torah wrote, maybe without thinking. And here is what he thinks.
Also saying though, right? The Tav says Yoreh de ken katav lefi ma shekatav haTorah, right? He wrote this because of what the Torah wrote.
Yeah. I'm not sure there's a significant or any distinction between the two. I would say like in what everyone calls a later Aron, a contemporary, they make a fine distinction between the Taz and the Gra here, but that might just be like a chiluk for the sake of a chiluk. Very, very quickly, let's run. The second Siman is not so important. This second Seif is not so important, both because sort of ancillary to the first Seif, and again, because none of this is halacha l'masa, because it's all in the context of not Hanan. But does someone want to read the tour in Kuf Vav Seif Bet?
I can read.
Great.
וכתב עוד הרשב"א, חתיכה שיש בה חלב שנתבשלה בקדרה, שיש בה 60 לבטל החלב, צריך להיזהר שלא יסיר שום דבר מן הקדרה, בעוד חתיכת האיסור בתוכה. תשמע תישאר בחרונה, בשעה שאין 60 לבטל החלב, תאסור מה שבקדרה. Should I translate until there?
Yeah.
Okay, so the whole problem for the tour is there is a piece that has cheleb with it, and you're cooking it, and you want to take it out, and he says no, because then you would change completely the 60 against the piece of with the cheleb, and then by it would become a sur, or if you take something away from the kedera, it would change the ratio, and then it would mess everything up.
Great.
וגם לא יוציא התחילה שחלב שבה יאסור אותה.
Great, so that was the first thing you said. If you take it out, it will become aser. If you take something else out, the whole pot might become aser.
ומה תיקנת? Sorry?
Yeah, תקנת.
שיניחנה עד שיצטנן התבשיל והקדרה. So what is the solution here? That you leave it there until the dish is cold in the קדרה. וזה לפי סברתו שאף לאחר שנתבטלה לא חזר להיתרה. אבל לפי מה שכתבתי שלאחר שנתבטל האיסור שבה אינו אוסר וחוזר להיתרה, אין לחוש. So you have to wait until it's cold. That's only according to the reasoning that says that it's impossible that it comes back to its state of heter. But if you follow what he said before, that if it's batel, it doesn't oser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the subject of the verbs is actually switching here. It's the chaylev doesn't oser, and the chaticha returns to being mutar.
Okay. Right.
Meaning once the chaticha with chaylev is fallen in, assuming the chaylev is no longer ba'ayin, even if it's still hot, if you take the chaticha out, any chaylev that's on it has been mevutal in the broader pot.
ומכל מקום, יש לחלק אף על פי שחתיכה שבלעה איסור, מתבטל האיסור שבא ב-60, ואינו אוסר עוד. חתיכה שהחלב שבה הוא באין, אינו מתבטל, ואף על פי שיש 60 כנגדו חוזר ואוסר. So he's saying the difference between the piece that has the chelev is that and a piece that swallowed an isur is that
I'm not sure it's the difference between a piece that's swallowed as nivai as balud isa. It's the difference between a piece that had chaylev on it, you drop it in, and when you take it out, the chaylev is gone. You can eat that piece. Whereas a piece that has chaylev in it, you accidentally dropped it in, you take it out, there's still chaylev on it. Just because it went through a bitul process in the pot does not now mean that this chaylev, this chunk of chaylev you can see, would be mutar.
Okay.
The Beit Yosef, just to summarize, because we have 3 minutes left, the Beit Yosef says that's very obvious. Obviously, if something has chaylev on it, why would I ever think you would be able to eat it? And the Taz, in the long thing that Alan previously summarized, comes to the tourist defense once again against the Beit Yosef. Seems to be feeling strongly about defending the Torah. And says the reason I might have thought that even if there's chaylev, that like a chunk of chaylev that I can see on this thing, it's not going to be oser, another pot should have fallen, is because maybe it's cooked down and the chaylev no longer has the power. Nothing of the whatever would be emitted from the chaylev against something like the kachal would have already been emitted, and now this chaylev is harmless. Obviously, you can't eat it, but it's not going to do any damage. Anyway, again, this second seif, the Shulchan Aruch rules like the Rashba against the Torah. In Kuf Vav, he doesn't mention this in Sadi Bet because it's not relevant. But this is again not halach l'maaseh because we hold chanan, so you have to take the piece out and you cannot eat it, no matter what. And the Shach and the Ramah will talk about. The Ramah says you have to take it out immediately. The Shach points out immediately, not immediately. It doesn't technically really matter, but there's no reason to leave it in, and you should take it out as soon as you can. And that, with 30 seconds to go, is our show for tonight. You can check out the Shem Shmuel that we had at the bottom. It was the only Hasidic source we could find that mentioned Asher L'Sochto and Chanan. I actually don't remember which of them it mentioned, but it's kind of a star source. It's not Asher L'Sochto. Check it out. Let us know what you think. I think Zahu. Alan, anything to add?
No, wishing you a week of much bittul hayesh against the nefesh, and or I need to go back through this myself, but so fun to learn with you all, and I'm excited for what we're teaching next week. Rav Jolden, who's that?
I don't. I think I'm in 2 weeks, so I don't know who's next week. So it might be Rav Nachum, but yes, you're
Stay tuned.
So very nice.
Yeah.
Good job, guys.
Loads of.
Yes,
Yes,
Terrific.
Great.